All right, I'm going to read this one from Little Rock, and then we're going to move on to the next subject, which is going to be a good one. Little Rock, I watch Viva, Fry, and Steven Crowder religiously. Do you guys, aka Viva and Barnes, believe he will release his lawyer on YouTube using Thomas's recent opinion on Section 230? I'm not sure I get the reference to the numbers, but I don't know what the deal is with Crowder and his lawyer.
Yeah, he calls his lawyer half Asian lawyer. That's in the case people think Little Rock came up with that. No, that's what Steven Crowder calls him. It's whether or not, Crowder obviously could have some claims because he's been demonetized. His algorithm has been driven down. And so it's whether or not Thomas's roadmap opens up the door for his kind of claim of a kind of consumer fraud, unjust enrichment kind of claim. Okay. So clearly he could be one of those people to pursue it. So I think that, someone who's been the victim of some form of consumer fraud, unjust enrichment by any of these people, and will be a good transition in the Google antitrust. That too opens the door. People could use that as a roadmap. That now that will more specifically apply. Well, I should change it. It'll in part apply most pertinently. I don't know if that's a word either, but people will tell me in the comments below. But the effectively to people who are competitors with Google, but technically, antitrust law is about you as a consumer losing a lot of rights and opportunities. So I think a lot of people could piggyback off of the Department of Justice's suit and bring their own antitrust claims. So I hope that between the Section 230 announcement by Thomas and the Justice Department's antitrust suit, that does produce a legal roadmap to go after him. Though I think Trump probably needs to win to have the political cover for those lawsuits to succeed.
It's very interesting, and if Crowder did it, it would certainly be it would make for content for an indefinite period of time. So it would be a win-win for Crowder. Okay, so let's do it now. We'll get into the Google antitrust. So I wasn't, I was familiar with antitrust law. Not that I'm hyper familiar with it now. I know more about it now than I did before doing the video. It's a very interesting thing. For anybody who doesn't know, antitrust lawsuit against Google by the government and 13 states, claiming that they are effectively they are a monopoly. They're using their monopoly power to maintain and grow that monopoly, stifle any potential competition, and that there's no room for innovation, yada yada yada. Bottom line, they use the billions of dollars that they get yearly from their monopoly to ensure that they retain their monopoly, which is in theory exactly what antitrust law and the Sherman Act was intended to regulate against or to prohibit. So government suing, seeking unspecified relief, but it's reorganizing and whatever. The question is this: a lot of people were pointing out, rightly so, that even the penalties under the Sherman Act are themselves less than what Google already pays Apple, Samsung, and all the other players who get their cut of the monopoly to maintain their monopoly. So barring I guess penalties are one thing. This is going to hinge on a successful restructuring if they succeed on the claim.
Yes. So the whole history. It's fascinating. You did a good job in your video of going through what the law actually says. Sherman Act was passed in 1890. The Clayton Act amended it in 1914, and they have had a few amendments since then. It was partially a product of this book behind me called The Populist Moment by Lawrence Goodwin. The word populist came into form then in the movement of the late 1880s by working class, middle class folks, farmers and laborers all across America, because of the problem of monopolies in particular, but other problems too. The railroads, the corruption of government that was just so brazen by these institutional players, the big trusts, the big banks, the big businesses that were we became the caricature, but also the character of the Gilded Age of the 1920s. But that even started before then, in the 1880s, 1890s. And the Sherman Act is very broad. You read that language. And by the way, this will be another example where Justice Roberts, maybe Justice Kavanaugh, probably Justice Barrett, will not interpret the law as written. Because if you can read, there's another great recent book by a guy on the left, Matt Stoller, called Goliath, which gets into the history of antitrust actions. The law, Sherman Act, says you can't monopolize, period. It doesn't say, you can have a monopoly that's created by just natural market conditions. That's not in there. It says you cannot monopolize, period. You cannot have anti-competitive contracts, period. That's how the law was supposed to be done. Almost as soon as it was passed, the U.S. Supreme Court, the legal academy, the legal judges, the big corporate law firms, all decided to reinterpret the plain, obvious language of this statute and completely gut its meaning. To say, oh, no, it only applies in this context, and then only in this context, and then only in this context, which was further gutted by the Rehnquist court. And this is where conservative judges have been bad. Conservative, that's when people tell me they're all originalist and they just follow the law. I don't know of a single one who's done that consistently, either on the left or the right. Scalia didn't either, folks. I can give you half a dozen examples where he completely got the original, where if he was following originalism, it would have rejected what he did. Where if he was following the statute for what it says, he didn't follow what it says. And I guarantee, put it this way, one of the reasons why Barrett has coasted through is because big tech and big business believe she is a guaranteed vote for their side. Matt Stoller wrote an article about it. He said, you know what's going to stop the antitrust actions? The appointees that Trump himself put on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I think he's going to be wrong about Gorsuch. I think Gorsuch is going to be more legit in this capacity, but Kavanaugh is an open question. And the belief is, maybe they're wrong, but the belief is that Barrett will undermine the enforceability of antitrust law. So with that, our law is supposed to be written so that monopolies don't exist, period, and then anti-competitive agreements don't exist, period. Unfortunately, almost all of that has been gutted by the judges and the legal academy. And they have amended the statute without legislative consent. Now, with that caveat, what they've done is they've said that if you tie, what's called tying, if you use your monopoly to gain economic advantages in areas where you don't have a natural monopoly, then that's abusive monopoly behavior, and we can stop it. We can break up your business. We can do a whole bunch of things. And the biggest test case for this was Microsoft, and it worked. So even though Microsoft didn't pay they did pay some fines and whatnot, but the biggest effect was Microsoft was about to dominate the internet. Microsoft was leveraging its control over desktop software to require that its web browser be the sole web browser for the world. And they were close to achieving it. In fact, Gates has bitterly complained about this ever since. So you played a nice little excerpt of his deposition.
Oh, God. I was going to play more, but I didn't want to look like I was picking on Gates. His deposition was the weirdest thing I've seen in a while, and did not give me faith in him as an individual, to the point where now people are placing such faith in him as an individual. But that's a separate issue. But what I was about to say was Gates. It had to do with Gates. Oh, I'll remember in a second.
I mean, that was David Bowie's, who I have problems with otherwise because of his political connections, but one of his best cases was the government hired him as a private counsel to take the antitrust case against Microsoft. I knew about that case was coming years before, because defense contractors had complained to me when I was in the software business space that Gates was monopolizing too much influence, and that the rumor was he had built a backdoor into software. What that meant was he had a backdoor in anybody who was using it, and high-ranking government national security agencies were using it. And they were not very happy when they found out what Gates had done. So that's why they've decided to also, of course, Gates was an abusive monopolist to the nth degree.
And now I remember what I was going to ask. It was that okay, the initial ruling would say the initial judge, Judge Jackson, and there was a whole history that I didn't get into in that video that maybe if you want to get into it now, it might be interesting, but maybe too much of a tangent. But he issued the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and they overturned his order to break up the company, as far as I understood, and it was pending appeal, but they settled the dispute. So we don't actually know what remedy the courts would have imposed, even on appeal. I mean, that's the ultimate conclusion. He was found to be in violation of the Sherman Act, but we don't know if the courts would have ever ordered the breakup. Not that I...
and that's because it achieved their real objective. Because their real goal was to get Microsoft out of competition in the internet space. And Microsoft's browser disappeared. Their search engine is a tiny share of the market. The reason why today Google exists to the scale that it does, and lesser extent Facebook and Twitter, but Google in particular, is because of that antitrust. That's the kind of the irony. Google only exists at the scale they do because of the antitrust action against Microsoft to keep Google out of that space. And now, of course, Microsoft's precedent is being used against Google. There's no question that Google is, well, by the plain language of the law, they've all been patently violating it for a long time. But putting aside the plain language of the law, even under these ludicrous restrictions that have been imposed on the anti-monopoly, antitrust laws, and they're called antitrust because the first monopolies were big trusts, and that's how they were getting around things. You can go back and watch the rise of what's it called? I actually have it. I wrote it down just in case. It's called How Big Oil Conquered the World by Mr. Corbett, which goes into some of this history of the antitrust, how they did it with big trust. There's a documentary on Standard Oil that's good. There's also a good, actually Nader co-authored a book called Hidden History of Monopolies. There's two good movies called The Founder, which is about McDonald's, and the other is called Tucker, about a guy who was the victim of the big three auto industry, who are later versions of monopolies that unfortunately were not legally dealt with properly. But so those are all examples of it. But so even by those terms, clearly Google's been violating it. What Google did is use their monopoly in one space to create an economic advantage in another space. So that's how they limited our courts arbitrarily, artificially, against the plain language of the statute, limited our monopoly language to just things like time. But Google has been doing tons of that. I mean, when people think Google just naturally has, they don't have a natural monopoly. They manipulated a whole bunch of things where they have disparate influence, that they own Android, so that they have force-fed this monopoly into the public. So that when you open up your phone or your laptop or your tablet or anything else, Google is the first search engine that comes up. That's not a coincidence. That's because they require it and compel it. So I think their goal is to stop Google from tying and remove their ability to leverage this degree of influence, and maybe sell YouTube. I think that may be a secondary objective. Now, there's a high-ranking Justice Department official. I haven't talked to him about this case, but he's an old friend of mine. He's a lefty, but he's a brilliant, brilliant mind. So there's people that think that everybody at the Antitrust Division is really in the pocket of. He's not. He's not there to work for big corporations. He was offered every big corporate gig you could give, turned every single one of them down. He just wanted to see whether they would offer him a job, so he went through the interview process. But pure genius, one of the great, brilliant minds I've ever met in the law. And so if he's involved in this case, then the Justice Department has a very good shot.
So now, one question I had reading the Microsoft outcome, the initial order that was overturned. So they order the breakup. I mean, the breakup, everyone thinks breakup is the end, the be all and end all of the government sanctions. How would that work, practically speaking? You break up, what was it, Internet Explorer from, I forget what the companies are, but you break them up. Does that mean that you can have no overlapping shareholders, no overlapping directors? Does it change anything at the end of the day? Hypothetically, break up YouTube from Google. Okay, fine. They'll be making money in two different entities. The government will tax them as two different entities. But to the extent that they can't prohibit overlapping shareholders, overlapping directors, so you just have two companies that are the same company but in two different corporate entities. What does it change?
So the best historical example is what happened to Standard Oil. They technically lost at the U.S. Supreme Court. But if you watch How Big Oil Conquered the World by Patrick Corbett, you will see that, or maybe Corbett, you will see that, in fact, Rockefeller anticipated that and managed to profit even more from it. So yes, there's a lot of devil in the details when it comes to this. But, you know, if the lawyer that is my old friend is part of this case, and there's reason to believe he would be, he knows that history well. He was a history guy before he was a lawyer. So he planned on going to getting his PhD in history. So he is very, very skilled at anticipating things like that and may find ways to curtail that. I think, again, their main practical objective is reduce Google's dominance and stop their tying this. I'm going to tie one monopoly to try to create another monopoly. And I think that they have a fair chance at achieving that. Now, Google has corrupted so much of DC that, you know, it's going to depend on how the judge does things and of politics across the country. So much of the legal academy is really in their pockets. And like I said, they believe that Barrett is going to be supportive of their position to limit monopoly law. Now, I hope they're wrong. But, you know, in the end, it's probably going to be a Supreme Court decision. But there's some, if the people I think are involved in this, and there's reason to believe they are based on the nature of the writing, they have a very good argument. And they're going to find a lot of, I mean, Google putting things in there like, let's not use these kind of words because people might misinterpret them.
The thing that I found, truly fascinating that I didn't ever fully appreciate is that, correct me if I'm wrong, actually, they install apps that cannot be deleted. Now, people don't appreciate that it's not a question of going to DuckDuckGo or using whatever from what I've been told, I haven't tried, even to put one of those as your default browser is not a 2-click or 3-click step. It's like 5, 10, 15 click steps, even if you can successfully do it. The problem is some of these apps are undeletable, and they still continue to collect the information that that Google uses to then market to maintain its monopoly. So they can't be prejudiced because of their position right now, even if even if the apps are not functional, or even if you do get another browser as your default, they still have undeletable apps that aside from owning prime real estate, as they described it in the suit, from what I understand, can still gather the very information that Google uses to sell advertising. It really is very cool. I don't see what the practical solutions could be. Breaking them up, I don't know. Find them into non-existence. I see a lot of people in the chat. They're saying the internet should be declared a utility. What does it do? I don't even know how that happens. How would the internet become a utility?
It would become federally regulated like phone lines, but there's a lot of, how much that would, there's a lot of doubt on at least some circles that would end up achieving the net benefit people wanted to achieve. Because the problem would be, yes, okay, then certain restrictions would apply to it, but then you have regulatory capture problems. And people like Google are very good at capturing the entities they're supposedly regulating them, and then they become a tool of Google rather than a means of checking Google. So I think that would be some of the issues. Someone like Nader would be in favor of regulatory control. My argument with him was those agencies almost always end up captured by the various groups that you're trying to control. So now here's my view. I think use the legal pressure, political pressure of the lawsuit, which I think can change things dramatically if done correctly, because it worked in Microsoft. Nobody had disciplined anybody in the antitrust environment forever until that Microsoft suit, and they actually did stop one of the greediest, most vicious billionaires in the world, Bill Gates, complete liar. Just now, I'll give David Bowie's credit. He just exposed him for what a complete lying fraud he was. If you want to see a deposition of a lying fraud, watch the deposition of Bill Gates. What does that word mean? I'm not sure that word means that word. Are you sure it means that word?
It was worse than Bill Clinton's. That depends on what your definition of is. It was the most stomach churning evasiveness and dishonesty you'd see in a witness anywhere. And like people now, I don't think that people don't ever change. I just tend to think they rhyme with their past selves. People would be well served to understand who Bill Gates was 20 years ago when assessing what he is and what he's doing now. I mean, that's just to understand an individual. It was, I may do it was just such a long deposition, and the behavior was so peculiar, but it was so evasive, so dishonest, and he got railed. I'm too young to remember, but he got reamed at the time. And
David Bowie's just destroyed him. His arrogance was his problem. He didn't prep for that deposition well. He thought, hey, I can do what I want. I can da-da-da. And David Bowie's a great, very skilled lawyer. I have problems of how he shows up magically in certain cases. But always been a very skilled lawyer. He wears sneakers in the courtroom like I sometimes do, or used to drive lawyers crazy. They'd see the sneakers, like, what are you doing with the sneakers? What are you doing? It was, this is fun. I was like, this is great. But there was tactical reasons to do it. But yes, it's a great example. And also, how do you take apart an evasive witness without ever even sounding hostile? That David Bowie's deposition, I use it as a educational tool for young lawyers. Say, watch this. Now there's I worked for a plaintiff's lawyer who was even better than Bowie's. He was brilliant. Just brilliant. Cases he managed to set up to win. He's not happy with me because I left. But that's another story. Trophies were supposed to stay in the cabinet, not walk out the door. And I was like the brain trophy on the wall. He had some other trophies. We won't get to that. But brilliant. Just for that, and to show you who Bill Gates really is. It's very educational. But here's the technological tool that may help. I do believe that blockchain has the potential revolutionary capability to go at the issue you're talking about, that all of this is about monetizing people's private information, often without their consent. And like that's where like people say, "Oh, Bob, the internet's free." No, it's not. They're taking my private information that's making them richer than they're making me without my formal consent really meaningfully in the process. That became clear to me when I started talking about voter files and people are like, "Hold on a second. They know about who I subscribe to?" It's like, "Pal, they know a lot more than that." There's a reason those advertisements seem directed exactly at you when you get them on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And so the internet. I mean, just do a Google search. How is it that magically certain ads keep popping up over and over again? It's because they know exactly who you are.
It's over the top, and I have a running gag with one of my kids where I say, like, let's as a joke talk about something that none of us have ever talked about before, and watch an ad pop up later on in our feeds. And I mean, I the problem is sometimes I don't remember if we've actually searched for it in Google, but the last thing that came up were these stupid these like one piece warm blankets that we were talking about, and then, sure enough, see an ad come up later, and to me, there's no question. I don't think it's conspiracy thought anymore. I think it's just common sense.
It's the whole basis of their valuation. The whole basis of their valuation is privatized information. It's not that they have a unique advertising access just because of the existence of their platform and the number of their subscribers. It's because they can tell an advertiser exactly which audience to reach, which they can only do because they know tons of information. It's why they want you to like things. Hey, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Because you're giving your personal information.
And react to, and how are you feeling today? It's first of all, not my real name says Viva. VF has Siri in his house. I have Siri. I've just come to grips with the fact that I am constantly being recorded, even when my phone is off. I've thought this for a long time. I've always acted like this. It's sort of a quasi-religious way of acting, like God is always watching. Right now, I take for granted that Google has 24/7 of everything that happens in my house. And I mean,
I put it in my movie room, and I figured out it can't tell the difference. So like it'll also like weirdly respond to the movie at different times. It'll all of a sudden start speaking, and I was like, "Whoa!" Then I was like, "Oh, this is great. They'll be getting all this false intel. They'll be thinking these characters in the show are me." I was like, "Okay, this is a useful disinformation campaign to the Google aggregators."
Robert, we're on the same wavelength. I was literally doing a Zoom call with people, and I was talking about how in my videos, when I, as a joke, say, "Hey," I don't want to do it right now, SIRI. Everyone says, "Don't do that." My phone comes up when you do that in your videos. And so I did. I'm on a Zoom call. I was like, "Hey guys, watch this." And I say, hey. And then I ask a humorous question, just so that will now be in everyone else's search engine the next time. It's an amazing thing. I don't think people really understand how Google works. I certainly don't understand what they're doing to maintain the monopoly. They own it, and there's nothing anybody can ever do. Everybody says, "Go build your own platform," whatever.
That's not the only potential threat. Would be blockchain. If all of our information could be owned by blockchain, then the way blockchain technology works at least has the conceptual capability to prevent anyone from monetizing that information without our consent. And so it's the same reason why the music industry was trying to explore using blockchain, because it would prevent the misapplication of royalties. And so that anytime their song was played, they would almost have to get paid due to how the technology works. So blockchain, for people who don't know, is the basis of Bitcoin. So blockchain has the revolutionary capacity, at least in theory, to take back our control of our personal information away from big tech. And I think that may be the technological solution if it goes in certain directions.
Well, or I forget. I think it was, first of all, Ramtab, thank you very much. Or I think it was in Estonia that was one of the first European countries to declare personal data a private property that can't be gathered without consent. Are we too late for that now?
No, and what they could do also is allow unjust enrichment claims, because I mean that's what has really happened. I mean, not only do they do that when they let you get on, monetize their audience, and then they kick you off or somehow limit your reach, but really that's kind of happening in the personal information space. Also because they've been lying so repeatedly. Remember that lawsuit you covered with Facebook?
Oh yeah.
They've been lying repeatedly to people, which means to me they've monetized our private information without our full knowledgeable consent, and sometimes by overt fraud. We should be able to get the economic reward for that rather than them. And of course, that would economically destroy them if it was ever enforced.
Well, and so now it might be, call it conspiratorial thought. Why would anyone trust the government to want to undo this as opposed to usurp this massive power? I mean, you say like break up.
My suspicion, because I had doubts that whether I said about 18 months ago I thought this suit would happen. because of who was getting together with the attorney generals in the states, with Barr's office. I thought Barr was sincere. But more importantly, what I did not disclose is that I know some of the people that are in that department, in the antitrust division, and they're the real deal. So that's why I think this suit happened. It happened because there's some people that have been very, very patient. I mean, 20 years kind of patient, waiting for the opportunity to reinvigorate antitrust law in America, who are old, who believe in books like this, The Populist Moment, or Bad Money by Kevin Phillips, talking about what happened leading up to the crash of 28 and its political component. Both good books. They deeply believe in it, and they deeply believe in reinstating and reinvigorating the antitrust monopoly laws in a much broader way, and they were looking for the opportunity to do so, and now they're in a position to do so. So I think that their motivations for this suit are very legitimate. Okay. I think Google believes it can politically weasel its way out because they still have a lot of political connections across the country.
And they got a lot of cash also, and cash, if you don't have the connections, can get the connections.